Hello, hello, and welcome once again to a Beatles podcast that we call Things We Said Today. This is a show that we do every 2 weeks, or we try to do every 2 weeks, in which we discuss anything and everything dealing with the Beatles. Their years together, the solo years, their music, their history, any aspect of their careers we will talk about here on this show, including what's going on in Beatle news. I'm Ken Michaels. I'm one of the three regular co-hosts of this show. You might also know me for my syndicated Beatles radio program called Every Little Thing. I also co-host another Beatles talk show podcast, and it's mainly on the solo careers of the Beatles called Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast. And I have my own YouTube channel as well, Ken Michaels Radio, which is all about the Beatles. I have many guests on my YouTube channel. Could be anybody from podcasters to authors to musicians. Anyone who's everyone could be on my channel. And joining me on Things We Said Today, my two other regular co-hosts. First of all, a man who for many years worked at the New York Times, writing for the classical music releases and events. And also, most recently, he co-wrote The McCartney Legacy, Volume 1, with Adrian Sinclair. Volume 2 comes out December the 10th, and we're all counting down the days for that. That's Allan Kozinn. Hi, Allan.
Hello, folks. Hello, Ken. Hello, Darren. Hello, everyone.
And
Howdy.
Devivo is also with us for a good 40 plus years now. He has been a DJ on New York's WFUV, where he's been handling their rock format. Call it what? AAA format, Darren?
Kind of our kind of
Your
interpretation of AAA, our version of it.
Okay. He's done tremendous work on the channel for all these years. And just to say, being in New York radio for that long, that's quite an accomplishment right there. To be at any radio station
Yeah.
for 40 years and not leave and come back or go to all many other radio stations, that's quite an accomplishment right there. Hi, Darren.
Hello, Ken. How are you, Alan? Happy Halloween, everyone.
On today's show, we have a very special guest who is the director of the new documentary called Daytime Revolution. And that all deals with a week in February of 1972 when John and Yoko co-hosted the Mike Douglas Show. We're going to bring him on in just a few moments from now. But I have gathered together some news items in the last few weeks that we haven't actually gotten around to bringing up here on this show. So just a little bit of Beatle news, and then we'll bring on our special guest. First of all, Paul McCartney's company, MPL, have announced that 5 more SHM CDs are coming out from his catalog, and that's on December the 6th. The albums are Wings at the Speed of Sound, Venus and Mars, Wings Over America, Thrillington, and Wings Greatest. Either of you collect those CDs? What are
I
your,
have the first batch,
yeah,
and I hope I'm going to order the second batch because why not try to have everything that's ever been made?
mm. What do you think of the
Looking forward to Thrillington.
Uh, what was that, Alan?
Really looking forward to Thrillington.
I think I've actually only listened to Thrillington once or twice ever.
Mm.
And that was when it came out on CD. Would that have been the tail end of the 90s or in the aughts, or whatever they are, the zeros? And I remember, it's funny because I didn't understand what it was when it came out in 77. I was in the Wings Fun Club at the time, and I remember them talking about it, but I didn't get it. What is this Thrillington thing?
Mm.
But anyway, I have not listened. I really, I just, it was more for collecting purposes. I got the first round.
Mhm.
And so I think it's interesting, though, that London Town's not part of the second batch of releases and makes me wonder if
You're not the only
uh,
one who's thought that.
it's because London Town is earmarked for, you know, the catalog. I don't even remember what Paul calls the Paul McCartney nuts.
Bible collection.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know Beatley Tone did a video where he's talking about, well, why did they stop right there?
Yeah. Yep.
So we shall see if there's any truth to that, if there will be a London Town and Back to the Egg releases in the near future. The record company Ace will be releasing a compilation called Here, There, and Everywhere. Black America sings John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison. It's coming out November 29th. Ace has already issued 2 previous compilations of black artists covering the Beatles, and this is now their 3rd one. And this time they have included some solo Beatles music being covered. Some of the solo songs that might surprise you: Isn't It a Pity by the 3 Degrees. Remember the 3 Degrees? And Will I See You Again? Let 'Em In by Billy Paul. Give Peace a Chance, Randy Crawford. Jealous Guy by Donny Hathaway. Every Night by the Drifters. And in a touch of irony, the Chiffons. The same Chiffons that recorded He's So Fine. And there was that big lawsuit with My Sweet Lord. Well, they're covering My Sweet Lord on this collection. This will be made available on CD, 2 LP set, and a Rough Trade exclusive red and blue vinyl. And thanks to Scott O'Rourke for that information. There's going to be another Ivies release called How Much Is the Sky? That comes out November the 15th on CD and vinyl. You can pre-order now for downloads only on Amazon Music and Apple Music. Of course, the Ivies, the band that became Badfinger. This will be released on Y&T Music. That's the same record company that put out the Pete Ham demos recently, and Tom Evans, and the Pete Ham tribute.
Yeah.
Called Shine On. These demos go back to the years 1967, 68, and 69. And there'll be a limited edition pressing of 300 copies signed by Ron Griffiths, the original player in the Ivies / Badfinger. Okay, and thanks to Tom Brennan for that information. Also, let's see here. I forgot to mention this a while back. Lucinda Williams has recorded an entire album of covers of Beatles songs, which happened to be recorded at Abbey Road Studios. There'll be 12 songs on the album, and already the first single has been released. That's her version of While My Guitar Gently Weeps. The new album, called Lucinda Williams Sings the Beatles from Abbey Road, comes out December the 6th. And also, a band known as McDonald's Farm Band, which includes friends and colleagues of Denny Lane, including former Wings drummer Steve Holley, have just recorded their cover of Denny's song, Time to Hide, which they just released on October the 29th. I know that it's come out on CD. I'm waiting to find out if it's coming out in any other format. But yeah, in fact, I'll mention this also at the end of the show. I just did a very special program on my YouTube channel in which I reunited Denny Sywell, Lawrence Juber, and Steve Holley, and we all talked about Denny Lane for about an hour and a half as a tribute to Denny, as October the 29th marked what would have been his 80th birthday.
Nice.
Okay. And that's it for the news.
I'm 31 now, and I've grown up in many ways, and you have to be more politically aware in a day and age like this. It's almost impossible to close your eyes to it.
It was a time of considerable fracturing.
And you read in the newspapers that the war's over, but the war's not over.
You have to understand where the Mike Douglas Show sat in culture.
Here is John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
It was the most popular show in daytime television.
When President Nixon leaves for Peking on Thursday,
Yoko said, we're doing this show on Mike Douglas. We're having Bobby Seale and Jerry Rubin. And I'm going like, what?
Here is Ralph Nader.
Is he running for president?
No.
John Lennon and Yoko Ono didn't want us to talk about their music. That spoke for itself.
The What would you like to talk about this week, John?
Love, peace, communication,
Drugs.
drugs,
Talk about that.
anything.
When I got to the studio, I got a glimpse of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. I said, oh my goodness, this is exciting.
They did have an agenda, and the agenda had to do with making the world better.
Yeah, it was something they were trying to get away with.
Well, young people are known to be cynical, and I say to them, nobody's smart enough to be a pessimist.
Imagine there's no heaven.
People tend to think that somebody will save them, and there's only people can save us, only us all deciding to do something about anything, whatever it is. Just even making that decision that I want to do something is a start.
Imagine all the people living for today.
And as promised, we do have a very special guest to welcome to our show this time. It's Erik Nelson, and he is the director of the new documentary called Daytime Revolution, which explores that one week in February of 1972 when John and Yoko co-hosted the Mike Douglas Show. And this is an amazing documentary, tells you so much about it, all the guests who were on it, why it was done. And it's fascinating just to see John and Yoko as co-hosts and how well they did in front of the camera and interviewing people along with Mike.
Mm-hmm.
But Erik, welcome to Things We Said Today. It's great to have you here.
A pleasure. Named for certainly one of my favorite songs on Hard Day's Night.
Mm-hmm. Well, we knew that ahead of time. That's part of what.
That's why we named the show that, right?
AKA the John Lennon almost solo album. What did he write? 7 out of the songs on that?
I think
anyway.
there were only 3 that were Paul's, right?
Yeah.
I Love and I Love.
And Things We Said Today.
Said today, but I think Paul wrote the middle 8 of A Hard Day's Night.
And according to John Lennon, at the top of show 1 of the Mike Douglas shows, he said he wrote the middle 8 to Michelle, which actually wasn't something I thought. I thought that was all Paul.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Is that true that John did write the middle 8 of that?
Whether it's true or not, he tells Mike that. Maybe
right at the
Mike
beginning.
off.
And I thought because I haven't. The clips used in your documentary, Erik, it's the first time I'm seeing these since the VHS box set came out and as a long time ago. And I almost got the impression John was sort of, there you go, there it is, that John was like being polite maybe to Mike by just saying that, because when it cuts in on your documentary at the beginning, I got a chuckle out of Mike Douglas doing that song, and I had forgotten that he chose Michelle, and I'm like, They couldn't pick a different song, but
remember though,
anyway.
In 1972, everybody thought Lennon and McCartney wrote everything together.
Yeah.
There wasn't the exhaustive sleuthing of who wrote what, and David Sheff interview in 1980 where they go through exhaustively who wrote what. So it's an innocent mistake of Mike's, and John's very gracious, as he is throughout these shows, very gracious and accommodating. Because you're thinking, wait till John hits the stage. He's going to bite poor Mike's head off. And that's definitely not what happens.
I did hear he wasn't too thrilled that Mike sang Michelle before he went out.
Well, he just, as he said, they always play. Usually they play, and he says this to Mike. He said, usually they play Yesterday when I'm being introduced. So this isn't quite as bad as what they usually do.
Right. All right. Well, let's just start the conversation by asking you the very basic question of how this project came about and who had the idea for this, and also if Yoko and Sean were involved in any way.
That's a big question. I had a subcutaneous knowledge of these shows going out from when I was 16 in 1972. So I was aware this happened. I was aware of the box set that came out in 1998. So I knew physically, at least in 1998, the shows had been preserved, which you never know. That's not, remember how many of the Carson Tonight shows, all the BBC stuff that was wiped, you didn't know, but then I knew it was there. And it was pretty much my idea to turn it into a feature film. I just felt that there was this cultural amnesia about this taking place, and in a fraught election year, recapitulating or recapping the messages of those shows from the fraught election year of 1972 would be a project worth doing. So it was, and because John and Yoko signed a release, technically they don't have any rights to the material, except of course for the music rights. If you didn't want to use any of the songs, I could have made the film without them. But I knew, though I could do that, it would be a wrong thing to do that. So I reached out to Yoko and Sean and asked for their blessings to do the project. We negotiated a deal to have them on the inside looking out, and we went ahead and made the film. And Sean and Yoko, their notes, such as they were really minimal, were all very, very helpful, and all involved the other interviews, the interviews with the people we interviewed today. And their big note was, we want more of them. We think they're great. Show them more at the end of the film. I would say that was the only substantive note that I got, and it was a note that I was happy to take.
Right. Now, was this done in part because I think you started this or wanted to have it out 2 years ago, right?
I started it 2 years ago, and I wanted it. Yeah, originally I thought we'd turn and burn it. I financed the film myself, so the faster I could get my money back was obviously of importance. But as time drew on, I realized if I held it, it would have more of an impact, and it would be something that it'd be my part of helping to rectify any political, cultural imbalances. I'll be careful with my words here. So I wanted the film out there, and I wanted it out prior to the election, which is why it opened in October. And then the home video and the VOD, where you can see it on Amazon or see it on Apple, will be on November 26th, after the election. So no matter what happens during the election, it's going to be something that people will want to see and will resonate, and hopefully be an uplifting experience. And I think we're all going to need an uplifting experience in late November.
You could say that again. Yeah, because I thought maybe since you were working on it 2 years ago, you wanted it to time possibly with the 50th anniversary of their appearing on the show. And I also thought it made better sense for it to come out now, right before the election.
Missed the 50th. That was never going to be an option. We could have had it out last year, maybe, but at a certain point, I kept tinkering with the film too. I would leave it for a while, and I'd go back and watch it again, and I would re-edit it again, and not re-edit the whole film, but I kept tinkering with it all the way up until the release. And I actually tinkered with it after the film hit the theaters. I made some editorial changes to the film from what you've seen. What's coming out on home video actually has a significant change at the end of the film.
Oh, we'll talk about that towards the end of this discussion, I think. But the one thing that I was most curious about, which was touched on a bit in the documentary, is the guests who were chosen and how many of them originally came from John and Yoko that they suggested, and how many was suggested by the staff. Because
the ones that mattered then and mattered today came from John and Yoko. In my film, Vivian Reed, the singer Vivian Reed was a Mike Douglas fellow traveler. She came from the show, but she turned out to be one of the best of the interviews, so we were welcome to have her. But everyone else came from John and Yoko, and specifically from Yoko. Yoko really produced this. This was Yoko's vision, Yoko's baby. Yoko executed it, and John completely and enthusiastically went along for the ride. But it was Yoko who saw the potential of doing this show because she'd done the Mike Douglas show promoting Grapefruit the year before. And this is around the same time they were doing the Cavett show. it wasn't like they were strangers to American mass media. But what was different about this show was the fact that they were actually co-hosting it, and they had some autonomy in booking the guests. And of course, they were reaching a completely different audience, the kind, people who would never normally encounter John and Yoko in any environment.
Right.
Not to mention Jerry Rubin and Bobby Seale.
Well, yeah, when you get those outliers in there, it was just the idea of those political radicals appearing at around 5:30. The shows would usually be broadcast around 4:30, and they were 90-minute shows. So Rubin and Bobby appeared probably an hour in. And in fact, the only major disagreement that Yoko had during the tapings was she wanted Rubin to lead off show 2. She wanted him right at the top. And that's where the Douglas producers said, no, we're going to scare away our entire audience if you do that. And Yoko was not pleased.
Interesting. Now, as someone who at the time, I loved George Carlin. And some of his albums from the early 70s, that was John and Yoko's pick?
No, actually, that would have been Mike Douglas. Douglas was a supporter of Carlin for his entire career. His straight stand-up, wear a suit and tie, George Carlin, all the way through the jean-jacketed George Carlin in transition, hippy-dippy weatherman. And as Carlin evolved, so did Mike Douglas evolve. So that, I'm sure John and Yoko weren't displeased, but I'm pretty sure that came from the Mike Douglas side of things.
I think Mike says too, when he introduces George, that he's someone that he's admired for a while, and has known him for some time as well.
Yeah, and they had that connection, and George had evolved to closer to John and Yoko politically by the time of these broadcasts. So I'm sure Mike Douglas's producers thought it would be a perfect fit. It was one of Mike's hip friends.
Now, were John and Yoko familiar with Mike Douglas's show?
Yoko had done the show. So Yoko had taped the show in Philadelphia. I don't have the exact date, but within the year or even sooner had been on the show as a guest. So she had already scouted it out, and I think recognized that Mike was going to be accommodating and that it was a venue she could work in. As you know, Yoko is something of a control freak, and she wasn't going to go on that show without knowing what she was getting into and what she was putting John into.
Was it known from the start that this was going to be for an entire week?
Yes, that was the deal. John and Yoko, when they reached out, they sort of agreed right away that they would co-host. It would be a week of shows. They taped them weekly. They didn't tape them all in one session. They taped them every week. John and Yoko would take a limo with whomever radical they wanted to bring down from New York, from Greenwich Village to Philadelphia, tape the show on Thursday and head back that same night. So it was a long, grueling, not unlike John's early 60s touring schedule with the Beatles, where they would go do a recording session, then go up north for a gig, and then back to London. It was that kind of a schedule.
Yeah. Well,
so it was just, I'm sorry, really quick, Ken. So that's basically not a week in real time. That was over a month,
5 weeks,
month and a half.
Over 5 weeks. Correct.
Okay.
I have the taping days somewhere, but they were starting in January, early January through, I think, the first week of February.
The documentary does point out how initially John and Yoko were a little bit nervous, but they really warmed up after a while. And, I was wondering how John must have been a little bit nervous, certainly.
Well, the documentary, here's the thing, the documentary doesn't really point out anything. The documentary shows what happened. I was very careful when I made this not to do a film about the thing. I wanted to make the thing. I wanted to basically, in close to the hour and a half running time of one of these original shows, do one of the shows, paced like one of the shows, that also showed the evolution of the shows, as if John had come on stage and corrected Mike on Michelle, and as the show progressed, got more comfortable, and by the end of the show was master of the universe. So I kind of wanted to make the ultimate show out of these 7.5 hours of shows, distill it down to what turned out to be about 80 minutes of the actual Douglas shows, with an additional 20 minutes or so of contextual interviews. But I didn't want to italicize what I was doing or have any, I wanted just to, and if the ticket to admittance was, if you were on the set that day, you could come on. So Ernie DeMassa, the Douglas show producer, he was there. The 4 guests were there, and their experiences were valid because they were there. And any comments they had about the shows, seeing them 50 years after their original appearance, were also valid. What I didn't do is put in my opinion or outside experts. At one point I thought of, the one person I thought that would have been an interesting choice, who is a brilliant musician, a Lennon freak, and has also hosted a primetime talk show, was Elvis Costello. I thought if anyone could have sort of contextualized it, it would have been Elvis, but it would have been pointless. What would Elvis Costello bring to the party more than what the original programs did, which was very much my mission.
Well, I think Mike Douglas deserves a lot of credit for doing this kind of thing. And was there
not just doing it, for being as good as he was. Douglas was fantastic. Douglas absolutely brought out the best in Yoko, the best in John. You guys are experienced Beatle fans and John Lennon students. It's my opinion, and this is my opinion, this is about as good as John ever was. He looked great. He was accommodating. He was funny. He played kick-ass rock and roll. He did Groucho impersonations. He put on an apron and was goofy like he used to be in the early 60s when they would do TV appearances on British variety shows. He talked about his life with his family, the death of his mother. It's the whole package. And I don't think John was ever better in this. I've never seen him any better, other than maybe A Hard Day's Night.
Well, it made me wish that maybe John and Yoko could do this more often, because I think that they had the talent to host.
But the following week, everything changed. John was a chameleon, one week to the next. If you look at John's evolution from Get Back in '69, when he's kind of zoinked out on heroin, and then that's when he grows the massive beard the next year. Then he shaves his head off and he's in Janov's Primal Scream yelling at Jan Wenner. Then he goes to New York, and then he's, it was just John was constantly. And then after these shows were done, we go into 73 and 74, the May Pang years. So this film just captures him, that month of January into February. It was everything lined up for John. I think for the John Lennon who we want to remember. And that was part of what I wanted to do in the film, was show John at his best. And it wasn't hard. It wasn't like I had to cut anything out. There wasn't things that, I didn't cut this. I cut things where he was great all the way through. We just had to make editorial decisions to cut 6 hours of the 7.5 out of the film.
Yeah. But if anything, my comment was really because of, I was so impressed with how well John and Yoko conducted the interviews on so many different subjects and seemed at ease at it, that they had the ability of doing something like this more often. But like you said, John was a chameleon.
And who is going to hand the keys to a television production studio talk show without those production facilities and cameramen to John and Yoko? That's where Mike Douglas comes in. So what you have is this amazing convergence of John, who is never better, Yoko, who is hitting on all cylinders as a producer and a content queen, Mike Douglas, who is this great avuncular, wanted to convey John and Yoko's vision to his core audience. All of this sort of came together in this month. And, this all leads, of course, to the deportation attempts, which I produced a film called The U.S. versus John Lennon about that, 15 or so years ago.
Mm-hmm.
This was one of the inciting incidents on that. And to be honest with you, if you watch these shows, Nixon was right. I'd have tried to deport John's ass too. They were a threat to Richard Nixon and the Republican Party. They were a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who could communicate that well to the silent majority, I think he was picking the right targets.
All right. We're going to go around the horn here, and each of us are going to ask you more questions. Allan?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we started talking about this before we began recording, but I was like 18 when those shows were on and watched them all, but was kind of mystified by why they were even happening, which I should have figured it out, but the documentary at least answered that question for me, which was, I mean, I saw at the time, and I think most 18-year-olds probably did, because we all thought of ourselves as little revolutionaries, and we thought of like Mike Douglas, Merv Griffin, and Phil Donahue as identical and sort of middle of the road guys broadcasting their shows for our moms. And like, we didn't watch them, we weren't interested, but because John and Yoko were on it, we had to watch it for a week, but they were fascinating shows. And like, it was, really kind of interesting to see them bring in someone like Jerry Rubin and Bobby Seale. And, they're on, I don't know if it's right to say best behavior, because they weren't lunatics. They were only painted as lunatics by...
Well, Rubin had his moments. Bobby Seale was a very serious guy. Bobby Seale was not Jerry Rubin. Jerry Rubin was an entertainer and a guy who understood viscerally how to use the media.
Right.
In a different parallel universe, you could see Jerry Rubin hijacking a garbage truck like somebody did very recently. That same kind of theatrical, create events and know where the cameras are going to follow.
Right. And Jerry Rubin turned out to be sort of a yuppie sellout as well, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he had his issues and his demons and, tact. I mean, yes, I think he didn't have the enduring legacy of a Bobby Seale. But the points that Mike brings out from Jerry Rubin about his father and kind of the underlying reasons why Jerry Rubin became political, I thought were very interesting. And Rubin's very articulate and funny. That's the thing, is he wasn't he was funny, he had a sense of humor, and was a great communicator in his own crazy way. Not the best bongo player, percussionist in the world, but...
Right. Right. I wonder if had they tried to get Abbie Hoffman, or was he in hiding by then?
I think he was in hiding, and I think Rubin was in the Village at the time and very visible. So I think Rubin had cozied up to John and Yoko. The film opens with a performance of Attica State,
right,
which Rubin's on stage for. So this is at the apex of the Rubin, John and Yoko convergence.
Did you get a sense from, well, first of all, I mean, of the people who are still living from that show, that week of shows, was there anyone who didn't want to talk about it?
A woman lawyer at the time who was brought on to talk about women's rights has since became a New York, and still is a senior New York judge. She didn't want to do the show. She didn't want to, I think she just wanted to close the book in that chapter of her life. And because she was and still is a judge, I felt but probably best not to push it. So we just took her no at face value. But other than that, we couldn't find Bobby Seale. He's with us. He's in Oakland. I'm talking to you from Santa Cruz, California. Rubin is an hour and a half away from me somewhere, but we could not find him. Seale is somewhere not too far away. We could not find him. We tried and tried and tried, but we just could not find him or get anyone who knew where he was.
Okay. How did you, given all the musical performances that happened during that week, how did you choose which ones to include?
Well, there weren't that many primal ones. There was It's Hard, which was really well done. There were 2 numbers with Chuck Berry. He did Memphis, Tennessee, which is in the film, and Johnny Be Good. There was Shake, which we used. There was Oh Sister, which we used. There's Luck of the Irish, which we didn't use, but guess what? In the home video, we restored that. So the home video will have Luck of the Irish from show 5. Great. And it'll have the uncut It's Hard, and it'll have the uncut Memphis, Tennessee. So we have three raw performances that we restored, and Yoko's audio team did the audio restoration. So they're going to look and sound about as good as they will ever be.
Oh, great. Great.
You had Imagine too.
Oh, of course, Imagine, which is maybe my least favorite John Lennon song. And I resisted a lot of pressure. Oh, you got to open with that. That's the whole climax of the movie. And I was like, nope, not going to do it. And also, I put it in the show. It was in show 4, and I put it in show 4. So I always knew I wanted to put the Q&A session at the end of the film over the credits. I always felt that was John at his most vulnerable and most kind of communicative. So I wanted to save that. I'm a firm believer in the Marvel school of credits, where you put stuff in it so people keep watching all the way to the end.
There's also Sakura wasn't in it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. But again, time, there's so much that we didn't put in the film. Yeah, because we had to cut, well, I don't know what the ratio would be, but the original films are about 7.5 hours, and we have maybe 75 minutes. So we had to cut close to 9/10 of these shows out of these shows.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, and I thought you gave a good overview of the non-John and Yoko stuff too. The David Rosenboom, who's well, as you know, still around because you interviewed him, but he's, when I was reviewing in New York, he was doing stuff all the time.
Yeah, and he's great. And, it wasn't that hard because we reached out for everybody who was still around, and we got everyone who would talk to us, and that made our decision easy about which things. We found Hillary Rosen. That was a treasure hunt, but we finally tracked her down. And we always wanted to use the cooking segment, and we would have used it without her, but it was great that we found her. So a lot of the editorial decisions were just made for us in some ways. Once I decided to lay the things out chronologically, once I decided to use the actual people who were on the set, it sort of narrowed the filter down. I didn't put the Chambers brothers in. I didn't put the Ace Trucking Company in there. There were things that, and there's some of Yoko's things that just didn't really hold up or were relevant. The phone calls that she puts out, as charming as it is, it sort of doesn't really work. And the climax is they get Frank Rizzo, the fascist mayor of Philadelphia. They reach out to him. Nobody knows who Frank Rizzo is these days. You know what I'm saying? So.
Is there any talk of reissuing this on Blu-ray or DVD? The show?
The five box set? Not talk from me, no.
No, but I mean, since you spoke to them while you were making this, I was wondering if you'd heard any scuttlebutt about whether they were going to.
No, I don't know who owns it, but I know to remaster it and do what we did to it for 7.5 hours would be enormously expensive. It took us a long time. You talked about the timeline of the film. It took us a long time to remaster it, to bring it to widescreen, to remove the digital dropouts. We went from the master tapes, so they could put it out, but it wouldn't look very good. And if you watch the VHSs today, when you see the before and after, which by the way is a supplement, if you get the home video and you get the Blu-ray in particular, we have a 2-minute short film that shows the before and the after the restoration in our process. So it really shows what we did to make it look good. And we didn't make it look great, and I'm sure we could have kept going for another year, but we went as far as we could afford to go in the time we had to do.
I mean, just the changes in technology and what happens when video or film ages, you could see, even though it was restored, the difference between the clips from the show and the interviews with people today.
Well, yeah, those are shot in 4K and high definition, that we had to bounce back and forth. And then there's a third element, which are the news broadcasts. I brought up Richard Nixon earlier. I had the idea of I wanted to geolocate these shows in the time they were made. So my idea that was on paper, a great one, was to find tapes of the nightly newscasts from each night the shows were aired. Nobody kept those. CBS, ABC, NBC didn't do air checks of their nightly news. They weren't even taking air checks of the Carson show at that time. They didn't care. You know who was taping every single night's newscast? Richard Nixon. And the Nixon Library had copies of all of the air checks from those various nights. And as they were part of the federal government, we were able to get them for free. We just had to bring a hard drive, tell them the dates we wanted, and they transferred the tapes over and gave them to us.
That's incredible. Another incredible thing from the documentary was the idea of Roger Ailes thinking he was going to be able to convert John and Yoko into Republican supporters of Nixon. That was mind-blowing.
Well, Ailes certainly was not up to speed on the counterculture. It turned out later it didn't really matter because he created his own culture with Fox News. But Ailes' role in that was amazing. And when we interviewed Ralph Nader, who's another one I was, just knocked out how great Ralph was at the age of 90, in his interview, he's the one. I always knew Ailes was a part of the component, but without any prompting, he brought up Roger Ailes. So Ralph made the connection. I didn't feed Roger. I didn't ask Ralph, hey, tell me about Roger Ailes. He went there, and I was very happy to have him go there.
Okay, I'll hand you over to Darren.
All right. And you guys took a couple of my questions here. So while Erik is answering, I'm crossing out, I'm going to get rid of that one. And then I remember the Mike Douglas show. I was 7. This was February. I hadn't even turned 7 yet. This was about a month before my 7th birthday. But the Mike Douglas show, if those episodes were on in my house, and I find it hard to believe that they weren't, the Mike Douglas show was a fixture to my weekday afternoons because my mother watched it religiously. And I have memories and the times that maybe Mike Douglas show was up against Monster Week on Channel 7. We're all from New York City, and Ken and Allan, I don't know, Erik, are you from New York originally?
At that time, no. But at that time, I was in Princeton, New Jersey, so I grew up. Instead, I would have been watching Officer Joe and the Three Stooges even in high school. But
okay, what I remember was that you had Mike Douglas show was on CBS, so on Channel 2, but over on 7, Channel WABC, they would have the movie of the week. I think at the same exact time as the Mike Douglas show, if memory serves correctly. And sometimes they would do Monster Week, and they would roll out the King Kong movies and the Godzilla movies. And I was riveted to those for those 5 days. So those 5 days, my mother gave up the TV. And I just wonder if that happened the week that John and Yoko were on Mike Douglas, because I was a fan, even though I wasn't 7 yet. So I could see my mother telling me, hey, John and Yoko, I don't have any recollection. But getting back to what I was saying, it was such a fixture in my house. And I always remembered one of the facets of the Mike Douglas show was the fact that the guests got 5 shows in an entire week. And I remember all the weeks that the Italian singer Sergio Franchi would be on. Those were
Zsa Zsa Gabor hosted a week. In fact, I may want to do a documentary in the week that Zsa Zsa Gabor hosted the Douglas show.
That's great. That's great. So reliving all of these moments was very special for me because it took me back to weekday afternoons was usually I'm doing my homework at this time, and the Mike Douglas show was on in the background. Um, who was it that made the initial phone call? Who
We don't
had the
know.
idea?
We don't know. As Ernie DeMassa says, we think they called us, they think we called them.
That's what he meant.
There
Okay.
was a producer by the name of Michael Krause, who was the producer of the Douglas show. And was it Peter Brown? There was someone connected with Apple Records who was definitely in on the discussions. But it was mutually advantageous, and nobody really knows for sure who called who. It just seemed like the thing was hanging in the air like a softball pitch, and they both stepped up to the plate at the same time.
Right. Because if you think about it, that was some leap of faith. That was some kind of risk to take, to not just make an appearance, but to do 5 shows.
Well, the key is trust. John and Yoko trusted that Mike wouldn't make them look like fools. And Mike trusted that John and Yoko wouldn't put him in the box to look like a fool. And from the moment they walk on stage, it's clear that even though they're finding their kind of comfort level, there's a truce between cultures. And I think everybody trusted each other, and the trust only grew deeper each week as the tapings went.
Mm-hmm.
So the key word is respect, which again was why I wanted the film out now. The idea that this America's living room existed in 1972, where you could get the most radical political beliefs of the time treated with respect and ventilation in this prime time or daytime massively popular venue where both sides respected one another, is something that should be celebrated and italicized for the present moment. This is what America and Americans are capable of doing. And here's the evidence. We have the receipts in this documentary.
Excellent point. In putting this together, were there any, let's say, behind the scenes concerns of the staff of the Mike Douglas show that you got wind of that wouldn't work in the documentary because you needed the individual?
The 2 bits, one is in the film where the producers didn't want Nabucco and Chris Ijima to sing the We Are the Children of America song, and that's very carefully documented. And Yoko objecting to Rubin not leading off the show. And what Yoko did was, when she was thwarted, she went and told everybody, well, I'm going to wash my hair. And John Lennon blanched and said, I know what that means. It's going to take 3 hours to get her back. And that's exactly what happened. That was her way of passive aggressively saying, okay, but if I don't get what I want, I'm not going to let it go easy. And that was a long story, and we didn't really have anything to show.
Right.
And it wasn't really that relevant. Rubin did get on the show. It wasn't like they bounced him from the show. So I felt that the Nabucco thing stood in, and it shows the fact that when a guest of John and Yoko's said, we sing this show or we don't sing anything, the show acquiesced. That gives you an idea of the respect that the Douglas producers had towards this great experiment that John and Yoko were trying to execute.
Mm-hmm. I do want to compliment you on the fact you were limited time-wise here, and you really had to sum up the best of that week and tell a story too, and give a little behind the scenes, put things into perspective, the news clips that you used brilliantly to put kind of, to kind of put everything that happened into the context of that week in mid-February, 1972. But you did a wonderful job in selecting moments when it could have been with John or with Yoko or the guests, where you grabbed the human side, you grabbed a story, and you presented it here in this documentary to show it wasn't just a clash of the generations here, but this week of shows effectively allowed us to see inside the world of Jerry Rubin or go inside John Lennon's youth. this is long before the internet and all this, and so many people watched those shows that knew nothing of John's background and where he came from, and you were able to take these elements out of the show and present them and show that that week was more than just the political climate of the time, and but it was also a look at these individuals and who they were.
Well, it wasn't, again, it was so obvious, the good stuff. You know, every show would usually start with Mike talking to John about the Beatles, about his life. So that was kind of part of the format. So, and that was interesting. It was interesting in 1972, and it's still interesting today. So that made that decision easy. Then I organized the material around the guests who we had interviewed today, and then used the parts of those interviews that weren't dated and seemed relevant and would cut. They only had 2 cameras. So we had a massively difficult time trying to cut the segments so they looked, you know, when you see a segment, the cooking segment in our film, I think it goes for 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. That was for 15 minutes or more than that in the original shows. So we had to cut these things down and preserve the essence of what they were doing. And I only had 2 cameras to do it. So it was very difficult. And that's why it took so long to edit, even though at the end it looks very straightforward. Like we just took a bunch of chunks of the show and threw some new stuff in with some interviews. If only that was the case.
Sometimes the commentary is from the, you know, living people today is really kind of interesting because, you know, we've all watched the shows and seen the cooking segment and all that, and Chuck Berry is there and never thought that much about it. But the way she describes it is, well, John was really into it. Chuck was just along for the ride. It kind of gave it a sort of humorous perspective, and you start thinking, okay, what is this like from Chuck Berry's point of view?
Well, when you see Chuck, when they're doing the Bio David Rosenboom segment where, you know, they're with the electrodes and the heads, Chuck's actually looks somewhat into it. You know, I mean, Chuck was just a wild card, obviously, and everything. And that was, again, you know, sadly, when people think of these shows, they think of that really crappy Bill Burr takedown of Yoko singing, you know, the Yoko stepping on Chuck during the infamous Memphis, Tennessee duet. And I'm a big fan of Bill Burr, but I always found that incredibly racist, sexist, misogynist insert personally before I did these films. And one of the reasons I didn't use Johnny B. Good, I could have bypassed all of that and just put Johnny B. Good and not put Memphis, Tennessee in. But I put Memphis, Tennessee in, and I maintain that the only reason a lot of people talk about those shows today, and the only turn it to 11 rock and roll moment in that whole performance, that ramshackle performance, is Yoko going Yoko and Chuck Berry's reaction. That's rock and roll. And that was the band, you know, that Chuck would work with whatever band happened to be laying around. And the band at the time was Elephant's Memory, and Yoko was a key member. So, you know, and Yoko's gonna Yoko. So I'm kind of glad that in all the reviews of the film and all the audience response, we sort of set that right. You know, you see it in the context, you see what they're doing. If you don't like Yoko, you're not going to like her, maybe. But if you maybe this film will change your mind. But at least you see Yoko in context of what she was doing, that, you know, in those shows. And I've always kind of admired her as an artist, but I kind of grew to really admire her kind of presence of mind and how articulate she was, and how not pushy she was, how kind of accommodating, and how much she integrated herself in the format of Mike Douglas. And I love her coffee cup. I love her gluing the cup together, or the smile box. It's charming. You know, the canvas is a great idea. You know, all of the little Yoko happenings, I think, are really charming. And you could tell Mike Douglas was charmed by it, as was the studio audience. So, you know, it was very easy for me to create a film that Yoko endorsed, but I didn't make the film I made to get Yoko's endorsement. Does that make sense? You know, there was a real difference.
Do you know whatever happened to that canvas?
No. That's a question that comes up often. No, the canvas was probably whisked off by someone. I'm sure it exists somewhere. The problem is, though, when I watch it and I see Mike sign it and Yoko sign it, and John, of course, does this brilliant little sketch. You want to stop there. It's like, here, just take that. I want that. Just don't, because then once they bring it into the audience and John's signature gets overwritten, I don't think it's the artifact. But no, we don't know what happened to that.
And one more observation about I don't remember the name of the cook who was the guest.
Hillary Rosen.
It was fascinating actually hearing her talk about the microbiotic diet, because today a lot of what she was preparing and the types of foods she was talking about is fairly the norm.
It is, and so much of it is, and that's the thing. So prescient. It's just her diet. Bobby Seale, everybody's talking about things that if they'd only listened 50 years ago and implemented them sooner, we'd have a lot less cases of type 2 diabetes, I mean,
I don't think today, though, the description microbiotic diet is used as much.
No, but that's what they called it then. But now it's just food that's good for you and not crap. Back then you're pushing against the, and God bless all the foods, SpaghettiOs and Pop-Tarts and all the foods that is growing up were all our basic food groups. But look at us all now, we're broken down men. So we should have listened to Yoko back 50 years ago.
That's what I did wrong, see? No, because
I'm sorry, didn't John and Yoko adopt a microbiotic?
Yeah. Well, Yoko went to the Paradox. That's where Hillary came from. It was the health food restaurant in the Village, and that's where Yoko, pretty much they took a lot of their meals. And that's why Yoko wanted Hillary Rosen on the show. And they wanted to bring somebody on, and they really didn't care who, and whoever they wanted or thought of couldn't do it. And he said, why don't you do it? And Hillary's like, okay, I don't know, sure. So it was very serendipitous. She didn't really have any idea really what she was getting into until she went on the set, as she explains in the movie.
You said that you were able to use the master tapes for the segments that ended up in your documentary, or the master tapes were used. What kind of condition were they, generally speaking, the entire...
The 2 inches, they were recorded kind of haphazardly. And in fact, the first show, the one that was kind of the most important, was recorded at slow speed on a 2-inch tape reel, not even recorded at the best quality. And we had the master tapes, the physical master tapes, and we had to transfer them to highest quality, digitally with no loss, and then start working on the film. And as we started to zero in on what we were really going to use, that's when we started to do the restoration. So we didn't restore the raw tapes, we just restored the stuff we wound up using. And if you look at the film, you'll see the first show starts in 3:4, which is the ratio they were originally shot in, because they look so grotty. And during the middle of the Nader interview, the tape quality increased by about 20 or 30%. So imperceptibly, we do a Wizard of Oz moment where we cut to modern day Ralph Nader, and when we come back to the show, we're widescreen, and we stay widescreen for the rest of the movie. Because I wanted to put it in 16:9, so as not to kind of rip people out of the moment. But I couldn't do it, and that editorial decision was made earlier this year. A lot of soul searching. We were really not clear how to pull this off, and I just said, "Oh, the hell with it. Nobody's going to notice," and I think nobody noticed.
Who actually owns the tapes? Who owns the masters?
CBS Media Ventures, the Mike Douglas estate.
Estate, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a very complicated rights situation, but Mike Douglas estate, then CBS did it, and it's complicated, and you have to deal with all parties. And for these shows, because we wanted to use the music and we wanted to be able to afford to use the music, because how much Imagine can cost if you decide to, John Lennon performing Imagine, how much they can charge for that.
And can only imagine.
Yeah, but in our film, because we came in peace and Yoko understands, it never has been about the money for Yoko Ono. And she wanted to be a part, wanted to see the movie. I had one Zoom conversation when we started with Sean to kind of outline whatever vision I had at the time, which isn't any different than the final film. I just didn't know how I was going to get there, but he understood the film we were doing and endorsed it. And then when we were done with it, or the cut, then, very nervously, I sent the cut across and waited for notes. I had worked with them on the US versus John Lennon too. And again, Yoko's notes were nothing but helpful. She really opened up their archives that, again, all you have to do is ask politely. I did my first feature doc, my real feature doc was the biodoc of Harlan Ellison, maybe the world's most contentious human being. And I had zero problems with Harlan. You just had to ask him politely, and Harlan was fine. If you didn't ask him politely, and I'm looking at you, Jim Cameron, on the Terminator, he'd open up an enormous can of legal whoop-ass on you, and deservedly so. But I kind of have that attitude towards icons who allegedly are difficult. And, I've done 4 films with Werner Herzog. Soundtracks have been scored by Richard Thompson. I've worked with Yoko Ono and Harlan Ellison. So these are 4 artists who do things the way they want and aren't used to being told what to do. And I've never really had a problem with them, as long as you ask them politely and have a project that they want to do with you.
Well, if you ever want to do a documentary on this podcast, things we said today, we promise we'll be very cooperative.
Okay, well, I'll take that. I'll keep that in mind.
Let you have access to everything. Ken, do you want to do another quick round around, or up and down, or
a few things I wanted to bring up. Whenever it concerns asking a Beatle, if you had an interview with the Beatle in the 70s, so close to the breakup, you always wonder, can I really ask questions about those days? And one thing I found really interesting was how animated John was in talking about the past, especially when he's talking about his Aunt Mimi wanting him to get more of a proper job, and she threw away his poetry, and just the tone of his voice. He was just so into talking about it. He really wanted to get that out of his system. So that part of this film I found really fascinating. And you had just said earlier that, well, they agreed to talk. Did they agree to talk about the Beatles in every show, or maybe?
No, I just think that's where, I don't think Mike said, well, we're going to talk about the Beatles in every show. I just think they wanted to it felt right to have a conversational segment at the top, and Mike was aware of his audience, and the thing that the lay audience, the housewives, they may be in housewives, but they were aware of the Beatles. So it would seem logical, someone tuning in, they'll talk about stuff of interest. That was sort of understood, I think, implicitly, if not explicitly. John was happy to go there as long as they could bring on Jerry Rubin and Bobby Seale later. So I just think it was, again, part of the trust they each had. But look how generous he is about talking about Paul throughout. Even says nice things about the solo album. Right. And the guy asked the question, well, I don't think it's that good. And John corrects him and says, Paul's getting there. He could not be more. And, that question, what do you think's the most popular Beatles song? I mean, imagine if you could ask John Lennon any question in the world. That's the question you're going to ask him. But John is great. John really is trying to, I don't know, want to hold your hand? She loves you. He's actually trying to think of the right answer. He's not saying, that's an incredibly stupid question. Next, which other incarnation of John Lennon might have done.
Right. It's just, you never know at various points in their careers.
That's what I mean about the cosmic convergence. This week we got peak John, peak 70s talk show, Richard Nixon curating the news things so we could find those. There was so much that kind of came together that week, and I was able to bring it together in the film as best I could, that, people say, well, why did you make the movie? The answer is, why would I not make this movie? Or more importantly, why did it take till 2024 for someone to make this movie?
Yeah. Were there any segments of the show? I know you were talking about Yoko wanting Jerry Rubin to open one of the shows, but anything that the producers or Mike kind of felt might have been a little too.
No.
I mean, the biofeedback thing to me was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, everything. No, there was no other, we researched it. Ernie DeMassa was on the set. Ernie was the young guy. He was, he was 24. So I think he was the token kid who was sent to kind of keep an eye and keep John and Yoko happy and run interference between them if they wanted anything. And Ernie says whatever he said in the film is what he said in the film. That was his experiences. So really, no, there were, as much as I'd like to report, it was this fractious drama. It wasn't.
Yeah. Since you mentioned Roger Ailes, would you say his involvement with the show and seeing John and Yoko that week was very influential in him wanting
I don't know. Remember, he produced the Douglas show up until 68 when he quit to run Nixon's media campaign that put Nixon as president.
Yeah.
And in 1972, Ailes is in the Nixon White House. He's working for Nixon. So he wasn't a Douglas show producer, but Ailes was absolutely an evil genius and recognized the power of the media and television to influence politics. So 23 years later, when he started Fox News, there is sort of an arc, an inevitability with Ailes then.
One more thing I wanted to mention, and that's the bit of irony in when John was talking to Ralph Nader and saying to him, you ever think about running for president?
No. And, I put that in the film just to get that out of the way. I have strong political beliefs, but one political belief I have, it wasn't Ralph Nader who cost Gore the 2000 election. It was Al Gore who cost Al Gore the 2000 election. Gore couldn't even carry his home state of Tennessee. So 500 Supreme Court vetoed ballots in Palm Beach, that's certainly not Ralph Nader's problem. And I'm really happy to see Ralph look so good, sound so good. Audiences love it when Ralph gives his commercial in the middle of the film because he's still out there. And my radio station, I have some radio shows here in California. Our radio station carries Ralph's show. So, and Ralph even did a promo for our community radio station on top of our interview. So I'm a big Ralph fan, and I wanted in the film and even in the trailer, I think I get that out of the way very quickly.
Okay. All right, Allan, any last...
Did John and Yoko have approval over the finished shows before they aired? No? That's interesting. It's good. Okay. And the other thing that when you were talking and saying, for Yoko, it was never about the money. I think Yoko has this sort of overarching project of documenting John's life, and you can see it in the Lost Lennon tapes back in the 90s, 219-hour-long shows where
Vince's new book, which just came out, which wouldn't have gotten out if Yoko didn't want it out.
Right. And the individual books that she's been putting out, along with her archival versions of all the albums, I mean, those are incredibly detailed about how those albums were made and interviewing all the musicians and showing the tape boxes and the tracking sheets. But also, you've got now, especially now, there are a run of documentaries, and then add the U.S. versus John Lennon to that. You now have the 1969 Rock and Roll Revival documentary about that, then this show, then U.S. versus John Lennon, and I think there's a documentary coming out about the one-to-one concerts. So it's almost as if she's not making these documentaries, but when she approves them of people who she trusts, and she worked with you before, it's kind of as if she really wants to get as much. The another one, Imagine John Lennon, which came out around the same time as the Albert Goldman book, where she had, gave all of her video archives to Andrew Salt. Um, and I think she wants the story out there in as much detail as possible. And everything she's been doing since the 90s seems to be adding up to that. I don't know if that's your impression as well, but
Well, the evidence speaks for itself. She's put the projects out. The new Mind Games box is incredible. It's mind-blowing how much different material. And Sean is very much involved in that too. Sean, I think, is very, very hands-on on the Mind Games box. 1-to-1, I think they just handed it off to the filmmakers. They had the concert, which they restored, and then she handed off more of her private archives for them to do whatever they're doing. So, yeah, I don't think she's putting these out because they're huge cash cows. I can't imagine how many copies of the Mind Games 8 CD box they're going to ship. And it's such a lavish package. I'm sure the ROI, the return on investment, isn't that great. But I think, yeah, she is obvious. Put it this way, if she didn't want the material out, it wouldn't be out, because Yoko can and will bite,
Right.
as well she should. So, but I think she's recognizes the value of their life together, recognize the value of her art, and in the case of my film, all of this cosmic convergence of all of it coming together.
Yeah, I think she has a real sense of austerity, and and wanting John's career and also her career and what they did together to be just sort of front and center in the culture, even still. It's a long time since those days, but I think that's what she seems to be doing. Darren?
Yeah, my final question, Erik, has to do with something that you did actually kind of touch on early in this interview. Was at the time that the show took place in mid-February 1972, the Nixon administration started zeroing in on John. Roughly around this time, John comes to New York City in late 71. By February, he's on the Mike Douglas show. In your opinion, did his appearance on the Mike Douglas show, was it a major?
It was an accelerant. It was an absolute accelerant in them saying, let's get this guy. He's a threat. He's clearly not going to play the Republican convention. Let's get him out. And that's when they started to do what they could to mess up his life. So yes, I think it was an accelerant. It wasn't a trigger, because he was already, the FBI files were voluminous, and they were hanging out with pretty much Nixon's top 10. The top 10 of Nixon's enemies list were all their collaborators, but and John just didn't care. But Nixon cared, and this was an accelerant, absolutely.
If John and Yoko don't make the appearance on the Mike Douglas show, can you speculate on what may have been different?
No, I can't, because if they hadn't done the Mike Douglas show, they would have done the 1-to-1 concerts, or they would have done something else. So no, possible to speculate. As much as I'd like to dramatize this and say, if they hadn't done the Douglas show, history would have changed. No, but the Douglas shows certainly were, as I said, an accelerant to what Nixon tried to do to them.
I also wonder, because of course it was such a difficult time in John's life to be on the verge of being deported, the lawsuits that went on for a few years, if he ever thought, we probably should not have done that show. This is only added fuel to this big fire that's going on right now.
No way. I don't believe John and Yoko second guessed a creative decision like ever. So maybe working with Phil Spector, but let's leave that aside.
Or having Jerry Rubin as the percussionist.
Yeah.
No,
I don't think they second guessed that at all. That was all part of the thing.
So yeah, okay. Well, listen, so enjoyed your film, and hopefully this gets the ball rolling a little bit to possibly one day seeing the full episodes once again. If not, we
They're
at least
tough
have you.
Yeah, well, the film's
Film.
out on home video on November 26th. Amazon and Apple TV, it's out in the world. You don't have to see it in theaters. It's out. And the Blu-ray, as I mentioned, does have the restoration demo and 3 uncut songs. And it looks, frankly, better than what I saw in theaters. And it's editorially different than what was in theaters. I'm not going to tell you what that is. You're going to have to see it you have to get the Blu-ray.
Yeah. What's next for you? Is there anything you could shed light on, maybe on another project you're looking forward to working on in the future?
I have a project that I would love to do if I could find out how to do it. And that's that makes the case that May of 1966 was the Renaissance of the Renaissance in London. If you draw 100, take a compass point on Big Ben and do a 100-mile radius around London of May of 66. Here's what's going on that month. Beatles, they're recording Revolver. They're shooting those videos with Michael Lindsay Hawk. Bob Dylan's at the Albert Hall with the band, those incredible last Dylan shows before the motorcycle accident. Monty Python gets together for the first time, all put together as writers on the David Frost Show. Stanley Kubrick is in principal photography of 2001 in London, and Muhammad Ali is in town in May of 66 fighting a heavyweight championship fight.
Wow.
How's that for a cosmic convergence?
Incredible.
That sounds fantastic. If that
Nobody has ever connected. You guys are Beatles scholars. Nobody has ever connected all of those dots before in book or film or anywhere.
I'd see a film on that in a heartbeat.
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, you asked. That's what I'd like to do.
Eric, thank you so much for doing this. It's been fantastic having you tell us all about this documentary. And we look forward to the DVD Blu-ray, November 26th. And thanks for coming on Things We Said Today.
Pleasure.
Wow, that was really something nice there from Erik Nelson, the director of Daytime Revolution. So nice of him to join us and to tell us all this information and background about that week and all the work that was put into the Mike Douglas Show, and John and Yoko co-hosted it. And why don't we tell the folks what we've been up to and give everybody information how they can contact us, starting with Darren.
All right. Well, you can listen to me on WFUV Monday through Thursday nights. So I start at 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. So that's 4 nights during the week. And on Saturday afternoons from 1 until 4. And WFUV is at 90.7 FM in the New York City metro area. And we have pretty good coverage throughout the entire tri-state area. There's a few little weak spots in our signal, especially if you head into New Jersey or southern New York City. But if you happen to be in that area and you want to tune in, but the reception's poor, or if you live in Barrow, Alaska, and you want to tune in, you could go to WFUV.org and stream, or get our app and listen on our app. We'll see. We're recording this at the beginning of November, so we're about 6 weeks, a little less than 6 weeks away from the radio station's annual holiday benefit concert. We call it Holiday Cheer for FUV. Recent years, we've been at the Beacon Theater. We will be at the Paramount in Brooklyn this year on December 11th, Wednesday night, December 11th, and performing will be The Head and the Heart, Margot Price, Bartees Strange, Infinity Song. The special guest host is going to be Adam Weiner from the band Low Cut Connie. And there's a VIP party that Kathleen Edwards, which I'm pretty excited about, is going to be performing at. And I understand that I will be one of the hosts of the VIP party. Then I have to go outside and help park cars. But that's December 11th. So if you want to find out more, go to WFUV.org about Holiday Cheer for FUV if you happen to be in the New York City tri-state area on December 11th. And if you want to find me on Facebook, I'm very easy to find because I have 2 pages and I'm always posting all kinds of doohickeys there at Darren Devivo or Darren Devivo, WFUV DJ and Beatle podcaster, or whatever I call the other page.
Okay, thank you, Darren. Allan, you're next.
Okay, well, you don't really want to know what I've been up to.
Yes, we
And
do.
I don't want to talk about it. But you can reach me on Facebook, either at Allan Kozinn or Allan Kozinn Remix. You can also email me at allankozinn, one word, at gmail.com. You can email all three of us at Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com. And be sure to check out our Facebook page, Things We Said Today video podcast, where we post the shows and anything else that we consider interesting or relevant. And, we're on YouTube. Go there and work your way through the archive if you want. A lot of people are doing. We get a lot of emails about old shows. It's kind of interesting, or comments on the threads. And also Podbean, you can get the audio version. Podbean distributes to Apple Music and iHeartRadio, lots of other places. So we're pretty much everywhere. And the only other thing I have to say is next Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day, don't forget to vote.
All right. Thank you, Allan. Just want to remind everybody of a special event that's about to take place in New York City on November the 17th. And that is that the legendary session guitarist David Spinoza will be doing a concert which is called Spin the Beatles Big Band. These are big band arrangements of Beatles songs. It's taking place at the Cutting Room in New York City, November the 17th at 4 p.m. This is a 17-piece orchestra, and David will be conducting it, and Kenny Asher will be in the band. Now, David, you should know, Beatle fans should know, for a number of things, playing on the Ram album from Paul and Linda McCartney, and playing on the Mind Games album from John Lennon, also Ringo IV. And Kenny Asher was also on Mind Games, as well as Walls and Bridges and Rock and Roll. So both David and Kenny both played on the Mind Games album from John. You can see them together at this show. It's pretty cool, this idea. Big band arrangements of Beatles songs. And it happens November the 17th at 4 p.m. Again, it's called Spin the Beatles Big Band. You want more information? Go to the Cutting Room's website, which is thecuttingroomnyc.com. And also, if you want to get in touch with me, my email address is everylittlething@att.net. My other Beatles talk show podcast called Talk More Talk, which is mainly about the solo careers of the Beatles. We just did a show for the 40th anniversary of the film, Give My Regards to Broad Street. Earlier this year, we did a show on just the music from Broad Street. This time it's on the film. We had two very special guests on the program, one of which is Edward Crawford, who has his own YouTube channel called Call Me Mr. Broad Street. He is the biggest fan you'll ever know of that film. He does a lot of collecting of any kind of merchandise that came out on that movie. He's there on the show, and so is Dylan Seavey, who's been a guest on my channel, Ken Michaels Radio, on the Two Legs podcast. Pretty sure he's been on Talk More Talk before. I think so, anyway. And Dylan is a Nashville musician who plays drums, has a band called The Minx, and he had the thrill and the privilege of going to a listener party to hear Ringo's new country album, Look Up, in Nashville. And he gives us a sneak preview of what that album was like. And believe me, he's very descriptive. He goes on for quite a while telling you what the whole experience was like listening to this album. And Jamie Lee Curtis was there in the room with him as well, which was equally as exciting as listening to the album, I suppose. So that's it. Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast. Check us out on YouTube and on all the major audio platforms. And also on my own YouTube channel, Ken Michaels Radio, I I just finished a tremendous show that's gotten a wonderful, wonderful reception. Um, it was a tribute to Denny Lane, who would have turned 80 years old on October the 29th. I've been wanting to do a tribute to Denny ever since his passing last December. And so I thought, would it be possible to get Denny Sywell, Lawrence Juber, and Steve Holly together for the show? And actually, I didn't realize till a couple of weeks ago that Denny's birthday was October the 29th. So I tried to get them before his birthday, and I just got it under the wire. And we do a lot of talking about the Days and Wings and what it was like to know Denny, not only as a musician and as a creative person, but also as a friend. And it's just a really wonderful episode. You should check out if you can at Ken Michaels Radio. I also just did an interview. It should be going up any day now with the author of Macca in the Long Noughties. That's by Ian Derbyshire. Actually says it's Derbyshire. And this is about Paul McCartney's career from after Linda passed away through 2009. He talks about all the music, everything that happened in Paul's life, of all of his personal challenges. And like I said, that'll be on Ken Michaels Radio, the YouTube channel. Please check that out. And if you can, please subscribe to that channel. And also, with great thanks to Allan here, who helped me out with the editing. You wouldn't have the show if it wasn't for Allan. So thank you, Allan. Also, there's my radio show, Every Little Thing. If you want to check that out, my Beatles radio program, which you can listen to on demand on WFDU's website, WFDU.FM. Look up the page for archival shows, and there's a drop-down menu for Every Little Thing. And you should see 2 shows there, what they programmed the last 2 weeks, and each show runs for 2 weeks on the website. And then don't forget my own website, kenmichaelsradio.com, Beatles trivia on there. And also I'm giving away a pair of tickets through my website to see the new show called It Was 50 Years Ago Today. That's with Christopher Cross, Joey Molland, Maxie Priest, and Jason Sheff. Apparently David Pack, who was scheduled to be in the lineup, won't be in it for this show. It's happening at the Ridgefield Playhouse in Ridgefield, Connecticut. It's very easy to win a pair of tickets. Go to the website, check out my ticket giveaways page, and if you live in the area, you might be able to see the show. And I'll be going to that one as well. Okay? So thanks to all of you for watching this. Special thanks to Erik Nelson for providing us with all this incredible information about this new documentary. You should all check out if you haven't seen it already. And the DVD, as we said, comes out November 26th, DVD and Blu-ray, Daytime Revolution. So for Allan and Darren, I'm Ken Michaels, thanking each and every one of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That's
And
a
you.
joke. And we'll see you next time. Take care.